we're going to play this for you, this clip, because I want to talk really about what happened with the press and this sort of like bigger thing. Because, you've been at this now for, I don't know, 15 years too, probably at least. And I just, the dynamic that's captured here is, I think, like, I am, well, let's play this clip here. This is Swalwell at the House Judiciary Committee interviewing Catherine Glenn Foster. She is the CEO and president of Americans United for Life.
Gentleman yields back. Mrs. Swalwell.
Thank you. Ms. Foster, you think a 10-year-old would choose to carry?
In the 10-year-old case, first of all, the Ohio...
My question is, would a 10-year-old choose to carry a baby?
In the Ohio case, the Ohio Attorney General said that abortion would have been justified.
Focus on the question, please. Would a 10-year-old choose to carry a baby?
I cannot...
Do you think a 10-year-old should choose to carry a baby?
I believe it would probably impact her life, and so therefore it would fall under any exception and would not be an abortion.
Wait, it would not be an abortion if a 10-year-old with her parents made the decision not to have a baby that was the result of a rape?
If a 10-year-old became pregnant as a result of rape and it was threatening her life, then that's not an abortion. So it would not fall under any abortion restriction in our nation.
Ms. Warbalo, are you familiar with disinformation?
Okay, we don't need any more. So she is saying that if it falls within an exemption, which it doesn't, but put that aside, and a 10-year-old can only get pregnant by rape. They don't have the ability to give consent in any way. I'm not sure that necessarily how let's say another 10-year-old, if they were to have impregnated her, would be treated. But a 10-year-old girl cannot give consent for sex. But the idea that if there's an exemption, it's not an abortion. Like this to me sort of reveals the fundamentalist underpinnings of everything that is going on with this stuff.
Yeah, right. There's some Salem witch trial type stuff here where they, you define things first in a way that the outcome is then produces that thing that you've defined. Like, the famous case of like, if the witch sinks, if the woman sinks, then they were innocent. If they float, they're guilty. And so therefore they're a witch. Then they end up dying, either way, which is also, this stuff is not just historical nonsense. Like this Alito, cited the people who wrote the laws around witch trials. Like literally, he cited those specific people. So yeah, I think what you're talking, I think that's right. So what they've done is they've defined abortion as a thing that is illegal. Anything that they're saying is legal falls outside of that and is therefore not an abortion. It reminds me of Todd Akin. When Todd Akin in what was 2012 said that a woman can't get pregnant if it's a legitimate rape because the body has a way of shutting that whole thing down, and so it reverse defines out what rape is. So you can't get pregnant by rape because the female body, designed by the Lord, shuts that whole thing down, was his quote. And then therefore, if you're pregnant, it was not by rape. And that's what they're really going for. Like, it sounds insane, but it has a logic behind it. And the logic is any woman who's pregnant, therefore, deserves to be pregnant. Because undeserving people just don't get pregnant. And in order to stand up that logic, then you have to start saying completely insane things. Like, if it's a quote unquote legitimate rape, you can't get pregnant biologically. And so that's where they wind up in the insane areas, or saying something like, well, if it's a 10-year-old, that's not an abortion.
I mean, that's the problem is they are trying to translate religious fundamentalism doctrine into
biology,
into logic,
the real world,
into logic, into real world, into logic. And it comes out sounding insane. And we should note, Todd Akin didn't even make it to the election, right? Like, I mean, this gives you like a sense of like how far we have traveled in 10 years in this country. And you know, I was saying in the lead up to that clip, I was saying, like, that woman is not put out in front 6 months ago. Or if she was, you would hear everyone from, like Tim Carney to Kessler to everybody in the Beltway media, from the right all the way. You can go deep into the liberals even, saying, like, that's not fair. She's a fringe character. She's not going to be in charge of any of this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And then the Republicans who know that 60, 70% of the country are not fundamentalists, they don't want to live under a fundamentalist regime, would come out and say, like, you can't listen to her. She's not. But those days are over now. It feels like it's with Roe v. Wade gone, it feels like all bets are off.
Yes. And because they're setting policy. And so one thing that you've heard, and we talked about this on Rising this morning, actually, one thing you've heard from Ohio Republicans has been, well, look, actually, if you look at the exceptions that are written into the Ohio law, it's possible that this 10-year-old actually could have gotten a legal abortion. And so it reminded me of this. Do you remember the Poland case where two young women in Poland died a few years ago after a Polish anti-abortion law went into effect? And hundreds of thousands of people poured into the streets because these women had ectopic pregnancies. The hospitals refused to treat them, worried about criminal liability. They died. And then, the country, even this, deeply conservative Catholic country, there's an uprising against the laws. And the reaction from the government was exactly the same as it was in Ohio, which was, well, if you look at the very fine print of the way that we wrote this law, it was the doctors were wrong. Like, they actually probably could have legally carried out that procedure and probably been legally okay. So therefore, it's not the fault of the abortion law. So leave us alone. But that didn't work with the crowds that poured into the streets. And you're going to continue to see that. And so, fortunately, this 10-year-old was able to get over to Indiana and get an abortion, quick enough. We still don't know, what kind of damage is done to the child's body just for that short amount of time. But if it goes into 20 weeks, it's causing enormous amounts of internal damage for somebody that young. But we're going to see, further cases, similar to this where women die or where young girls die. And you'll hear the medical professionals say that because of the law, they didn't carry out a procedure that they knew could have saved this person. And then you'll have Republicans say, well, you're wrong. Fact check. Actually, if you look at the intent mentioned in the congressional hearing, blah, 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 probably, and the Ohio AG only says probably, doesn't say it would have been legally, only say probably. But functionally, it means that these procedures aren't going to be carried out, because if there's a risk of criminal liability, a lot of medical providers just aren't going to take that risk. And so that's what we're going to wind up with. A lot of dead people, and then each time a disgusting social media fight over whether or not, within the law, the doctor actually could have had some defense if they carried out the procedure. If the case of Poland is any example, that explanation is not going to work for the public.
Well, I mean, we can hope, right? The thing is that the conservative movement behaves with the respective urgency of a minoritarian party, right? And they understand that they have to do a full court press to get what they want implemented because of the nature of the polling surrounding an issue like this. And you mentioned the doctors and the chilling effect that it has on their practices. The whole the right-wing media narrative surrounding the abortion provided to this 10-year-old victim is they're trying a bunch of different things, right? The rapist was an illegal immigrant, so it's Biden's fault. But what they're also doing as well is that they're targeting the doctor in and of herself, right? So the Indiana AG says that they're going to pursue some sort of investigation into the doctor because she did not report the abortion, which is a crazy sentence in and of itself, but she did. But, so we were talking about this on the show yesterday when Sam wasn't here, and someone wrote in and said, the Dr. Tiller baby killer case was not something that they learned a lesson from. They're trying to replicate that. And it just sent a chill down my spine, because in a sense, it's true, right? They're going to try to demonize any doctor that even comes close to performing a procedure like this. And so if they do, they're damned. If they don't, and someone dies from an ectopic pregnancy, they're damned as well. So I guess I'm just curious what your take is on the way that they're going to go after doctors in the coming months, years.
Right. Yes, they did learn a lesson from Tiller the baby killer. But, basically, they learned that their movement could get away with it. It's stunning to think that barely 10 years after that, and that he wasn't the only abortion provider that they assassinated. And you would think that a movement that extreme, whose ecosystem was not by accident producing, these assassins, would have driven itself into irrelevancy. Instead, it won at the Supreme Court. And so you're right. And I think that it ties into the other goal, which is shutting down clinics and just making it impossible to get abortion. So if you are a 10-year-old and you are a victim of rape and incest, and let's say the law is written in even clearer way that says, you are allowed to have an abortion performed under these circumstances, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The goal is that you have nowhere to get it, that the clinics are shut down and that the doctors don't perform them. I think the number of doctors who perform abortions is down. It's under 3,000 at this point. It might be substantially under 3,000 by now. Maybe somebody has the exact number there, but it's their goal is to get that down smaller and smaller and smaller, so that there are people who live, that can go 1,000 miles and not find an abortion provider. Like that's the goal. And then you can be nice and liberal with the exceptions that you write into the law, because you've undermined the structure of the healthcare provider network that is needed. And that's what's unique in some ways about abortion politics, because with prohibition, when they flipped the switch and re-legalized alcohol, bars were all open the next day, because a lot of them never really shut down, and everybody's still making liquor. And it's not that hard to put a bar together and put a restaurant together, put a liquor store together. But getting the medical training necessary to run a safe abortion clinic is a serious thing that requires investment in infrastructure and institutional memory. And they're trying to eliminate all of that.
I want to get your sense too on, this, and I think, well, I guess let's stay with this case just more for one more moment, because it also really shows how our media, what has happened in our media over the past 20 years is almost uniquely, temporally ill-suited to cover this story, right? And I don't mean this specific story, but we're going to see stories like this for all we know, there have been 3 or 4 other, or 5 or 10 or 15 or 20, other cases like this that have just taken place in the past 3 weeks. And we just don't know about it because there wasn't that one reporter who was there. And we don't know about, and there's no reason for a reporter to be there if a woman shows up in Ohio with an ectopic pregnancy and she can't get treatment because the doctor is like, I'm not going to risk going to jail. I'm not going to risk getting a fine wherever it was in the country. And there's no reason for a reporter to know that story. Right. The first thing you do when you have an ectopic pregnancy and your life is in danger, or maybe you pass away, you're not necessarily going to, there's nobody there going to go and try and get a reporter to talk about this. And maybe the doctors aren't saying anything. I just want to read this quote from Glenn Kessler, who who's, the fact checker from the Post. And this quote, I think, comes from a Neiman Labs interview. I'm not quite sure where they got the quote from. I'm pretty sure it was direct. An abortion by a 10-year-old is pretty rare. And we should say abortions by 10-year-olds are completely rare because
I hope so. Yeah.
There's no 10-year-old in the country who has the...
Doogie Howser was not doing
Right, exactly. Yeah. And then another quote. The Columbus Dispatch reported in 2020, 52 people under the age of 15 received an abortion in Ohio. So even if we just cut him some slack on his getting the wrong sort of verb, I guess, wrong in that, how is the idea of a 10-year-old getting an abortion rare if we're talking at least four people a month on average under the age of 15 receive abortions in Ohio?
in one state? Yeah, it's not that common. It's just once a week here in Ohio.
Well,
It's absurd.
Yeah, exactly.
What would count as something happening frequently for him if once a week it doesn't count?
The point is that there's no bar. It's just there to downplay, their theocracy.